Today we're going to be talking about a violent movie, so down in the comments I would like to hear your favorite, or I guess least favorite if you're squeamish, gore effect, gore scene, violent scene in a movie. Hello, I'm Adam Caesar. This is Project Black T-Shirt, the channel where we take a new or a reissue horror movie and pair it with a book recommendation that you will enjoy reading if you like that movie. Be sure to like this video and subscribe if you want to see more pairings like it. I've got plenty on my channel. And if you really like it, and if you really like me, and if you like reading, you can go check out my books. I'm the author of Clown in the Cornfield and almost 10 other novels, novellas, short story collections in hardcover, paperback, ebook, and audiobook. Today we're going to be talking about a very anticipated film, a very hyped film, although I don't really like to use the H word because I think it's a dumb word that kind of denotes that things aren't as good when there is a critical consensus, a positive critical consensus around them. So we were talking about a eagerly anticipated film, at least for me. This is Possessor by Brandon Cronenberg. And if you look up anything about this movie, you'll hear a couple different things. You'll hear, one, how violent it is, that there is a uncut version. In fact, they've changed the name of the movie on some streaming platforms, on some VOD platforms, to Possessor Uncut, which I'm just going to call it Possessor. That seems like a weird marketing tactic to me, to change the name of the movie. But the uncut version is like a minute or so longer, and it's not the one that's on Prime. If you rent the one that's on Prime, I think you get the R-rated version. I do not know what is different about it, but it's about a minute. So, and the second thing you'll hear is you'll hear immediately after people say the director's name, Brandon Cronenberg, they will not neglect to mention, yes, that Cronenberg. He is David Cronenberg's son. This is his second feature film, I believe, after 2012's Antiviral. To me, I kind of walked into this movie really not knowing much about it, really not even knowing the cast. It's a great cast, and we'll talk about that in a second. Not even knowing the premise, not knowing anything, and kind of bristling against the idea that a director, even if they are related to someone famous, someone artistically significant, should kind of suffer the consequences of like comparison to that director. But the first few minutes of Possessor, once you understand what the concept is, it becomes blazingly apparent that you cannot separate this from the other Cronenberg's work and from these two artists kind of being in discussion with each other. And I think that's a good thing. And I think it's a good part of Possessor, and it's one of the things I liked most about the film, is how it plays with your understanding of the writer-director's father's canon, the kinds of movies he made and the way he made them, and the kinds of themes that he kind of spent a decades-long career refining and reflecting on and talking about. Because Possessor is about a assassin who possesses the bodies of these people who are close to the person they're going to assassinate, and pretends to be them for either a couple hours or a couple days before they go do the job, before they go kill the person. They kind of build an alibi for why the possessed person would go crazy and kill their either loved one or their coworker or whoever. There's this big corporate shadowy plot that is hinted at and talked about where people are paying large sums of money to have these assassinations done. So it is kind of cyberpunk in a way, a very lo-fi kind of cyberpunk, because you see the machines and the mechanisms they use to do this stuff, and it's like a kind of near-future MRI machine and all these different little dials and analog knobs on it and stuff like that. So kind of cyberpunk, and then very Cronenbergian, because it is basically Scanners meets Existenz in the simplest, most bare-bones way. That plot is Scanners plus Existenz equals Possessor, but then you get that kind of information dump in the first 15 minutes, and then the movie kind of goes in its own direction and has its own concerns way beyond the kind of simple plot of corporate assassinations using psychic drones. And we focus on our main character, played by Andrea Riseborough, Mandy, and a bunch of other stuff. She's a fantastic performer, and this is the first movie I'd seen her in where I was like, Oh, like I can't wait to, like, automatic buy-in. I want to see everything she's been in, because this is a really, really good performance, a really nuanced, interesting performance. And we're following her kind of on this one job. We know that she is conflicted between her home and her work life. She has a husband slash ex-husband. They're kind of on the outs. She has a son. She has to keep going into work, going away for work. They don't know what she does. They don't know that she's this highly paid corporate assassin. And then we have her boss, played by Jennifer Jason Leigh, who's always great. Interesting seeing her in this after she was in Anomalisa, which they weirdly feel like they're movies that at least know of each other. And she's like torn between these two worlds, and we're seeing her on this, if not one last job scenario, at least like a job before I have to take a break kind of scenario. And she is tasked with possessing Christopher Abbott, his character, this guy who's kind of low man, maybe marrying into a big corporate family, and they're going to use him to like overthrow this corporation, kind of a hostile takeover in the bloodiest way possible. And things go wrong and things go right, and there's this divide between Christopher Abbott's character and Andrea Riseborough's character that happens, and it's just, don't want to say anything more about it, because it is a super interesting movie. The plot is kind of the barest bones a plot can be while still feeling like a satisfying A to B to C story. This is not super artsy fartsy. This is not an art film masquerading as a narrative film. It does function that way. It does very much function on that satisfying, tell me the story kind of level. But you get all this beautiful nuance and beautiful bonus material with all these, I would say, themes and concerns that transcend both the Cronenbergs and the decades separating them, and I guess maybe in some ways living in the shadow of a name, and that informs theme and plot in the movie in an interesting way. I really, really responded to this, and I responded to this in such a strong way where, as we've talked about on the channel before, when movies get talked up at film festivals, or a certain section of like the fandom gets to see them before everyone else, before you can widely rent them. I rented this on Vudu so I could see the uncut version. Like, there is that divide of like, do I trust the people that are raving about this movie, or were they just in really good spirits and having a good time when they saw it, and kind of plied with drinks and wanting to enjoy it. And I've been burned way more times than I've been satisfied renting a movie like that. And Possessor did not do that to me at all. It feels like the most real deal motion picture I've seen all year, in a way. It's really dense. There's a lot going on. It's beautiful to look at. It looks amazing. We had just talked about on the channel a few videos ago, we talked about the new Shivers release, and then I paired that with talking about Rabid and early Cronenberg, and his not hiding that the films are Canadian, him talking about Montreal in both films, and him shooting all around Montreal. And then in this movie you get like a really kind of beautiful depiction of Toronto, even though you don't get a lot of like on the street stuff. But it doesn't hide that the story is taking place in Toronto, even though it is like a near future Toronto. There's no like flying cars or stuff like that. This isn't The Fifth Element. This is like just regular old Toronto, but done, shot kind of beautifully and futuristically. The violence is going to be a point of contention with people. The sex and the violence is going to be a point of contention with people. It really didn't feel too crazy or too exploitive to me. The key scenes that I'm sure, I don't know what's cut to get the R rating, but there's a couple insert shots, no pun intended, that are pretty brutal, and I'm guessing they like shaved a couple seconds off those, or just don't show them at all in the cut version. But to me, they enhance the film, and I'd had a discussion talking about the mythical group text that I always use as kind of a straw man argument. But believe me, these conversations really happen. Just rented it last night, and my friend had seen it at a film festival a while ago, and then my other friend had rented it after him, and I was kind of last to the party, and we were duking it out because two of us were on team, this movie's great, and one of us was on team, this movie's he didn't love it like we did. And the big sticking point for him was the violence, and he thought it was too amped up to the level of like ridiculousness. This isn't a guy who's squeamish. This isn't a guy who's he's seen a Fulci movie or two. This is a guy who just thought the level of violence didn't match the rest of the film, didn't match the tone of the rest of the film, and I would completely argue against that. I think the violence informs character and reveals character, and informs theme and reveals theme in a very interesting way, in a way that I think is completely kind of supported by the text. So you know what, Brandon, go for it. You want to destroy someone with a fire poker? Be my guest. I really enjoyed it, and not just the violence, but everything about the movie. There are moments that just really feel like in lesser hands they could be edging towards shock for shock's sake, or like, wouldn't it be goofy and funny if we got like festival walkouts and people vomiting and passing out in the theater moments in this movie. But the rest of the rest of it is rendered with such care and such thoughtfulness that it really does, like, you end up giving the movie the benefit of the doubt of like, no, that does make sense because XYZ, when all's said and done. At least I did. I've been thinking about this movie all day. I've been thinking about what I was going to talk about with it, other than saying I loved it and everything made sense for me, which is kind of the non-spoiler way of talking about the third act that I want to talk about. The music, the cinematography, the performances. I mentioned Andrea Riseborough and how good she is, but her co-lead, he might even end up having more screen time, because for most of the movie she is him, because she's possessing his body. Christopher Abbott, who's been in a bunch of stuff. You first saw him in Girls, the HBO show, and then he was in Nick Pesce's Piercing, which I think I did a video about on the channel. Paired it with talking about Audition and Ryo Murakami's work. But guy's damn good actor. There's a couple of freak out scenes, and he gets one monologue that, like, towards the end of the movie that really crystallizes the, like, if you didn't think this movie was talking to Shivers, Rabbit, Scanners, Existence, if you didn't think this movie was talking to the senior Cronenberg's work, the monologue makes it damn clear, like, falling just short of Christopher Abbott staring right at the camera and saying, this is what I'm talking about, this is what this movie's interested in. Short of that, I don't know how else you could look at this movie kind of detached from its context in that way. But yeah, it's such a interesting, kind of rejuvenating movie. There's been a dearth of good stuff that didn't feel like it was going to go straight to video anyway. There's been a dearth of stuff that, like, oh, I rented this and I feel really bad I didn't see it in a theater because I know it would play amazing in a theater. There's been a dearth of stuff that's not like Netflix originals, or like, which that stuff can be good and is good, and I've enjoyed a lot of that stuff, but it's not, to me it doesn't feel like movie. It doesn't feel like movies that you'd go in and I normally would have seen in a movie theater. This does, and I think it was $6 on Vudu. $6 wouldn't get you half a popcorn in a movie theater, so like, yeah, incredibly worth it. If anyone's thinking about it, or if anyone's halfway interested in a movie like this, it's the easiest $6 you'll spend this week. I can't recommend it enough. And I just think I can't wait to see how this career progresses, and I hope there's not 8 years between his next film, because it's really vital and cool. If you are the old school Cronenberg fan who will say something like, oh, he hasn't made a good movie since Videodrome or something like that, I'm using that as an example, because I think Cronenberg's later films are fascinating and awesome and totally fit as Cronenberg movies. A Dangerous Method, History of Violence, Eastern Promises. I think those are as Cronenberg as it gets. But if you are one of those people that says that is like craving the early Cronenberg, this movie delivers exactly, and you'll love it. And on the complete flip side of, like, you don't know David Cronenberg from Adam, you don't give a crap about placing it in any kind of context, you will enjoy it and just love it that way. and it will feel new and fresh and great. So it's really like, what a success, and what a kind of relief it is, because I wouldn't have made a video this week, because I wouldn't have had anything to talk about, because I wouldn't have liked anything that I watched this week if I hadn't rented this last night. So, man, Possessor, or Possessor Uncut, as it's now called. Damn good. Go rent it. It's great. This week's book recommendation, speaking about the creeping depression of not being able to enjoy horror content the way we normally do in movie theaters. The perfect literary analog to that is Sean Haymill's A Cosmology of Monsters. It's been a couple weeks since I talked about a full-length novel. I've talked about either short novellas, or I've talked about comic books, or I've talked about collections or magazines or whatever. I wanted to talk about a book, capital B, book this week, and geez, I couldn't have picked a better one, because this is not only a capital B book, I would call this a capital L, literary L, horror novel, almost with like the literary in caps and the horror in like lowercase, small case. But that shouldn't scare you off, because I think there's plenty of here for horror readers to enjoy, for people who like this channel to enjoy. This is, yeah, one of the best books I've read this year. I think it came out last year. I remember when it got its kind of, it has like a super long Stephen King blurb that either might have been a tweet or something, and King compares it to John Irving. Like if John Irving wrote a horror novel, John Irving, The World According to Garp, if he wrote a horror novel, this would be it. And you read it, and it's hard to tell what the chicken or the egg, whether he like put that idea in your head, whether Stephen King like incepted me. But yeah, that's a perfect description of what this book feels like. It is this, it's sectioned into parts. I think there's like 5 or 6 parts, and each is a different epoch of this family's life, and it's narrated by a character who in the beginning of the book isn't even born yet, and we get to hear about his parents and how his mom met his dad, and how his dad gets sick, and then there's spoiler, and his 2 sisters and what's up with them, and the important thing plot-wise, for at least for our purposes on this channel, is that this family, it's their father's dying wish, possible like final act in the world is to like put on this haunted house, this haunted house in their backyard. They're like home haunters, and then that spins into like a business that the family keeps throughout the book, and it really does. If it sounds like I'm stretching to find a plot thread, there's many plot threads. There's a lot that happens in this book. This isn't the literary horror novel where you can't, succinctly describe any of the things that happen to each of the characters, because there's a lot that happens to the characters. It's really big in its scope. It's not a long book, but it feels sweeping in its scope, because you get what happens with the sisters, you get what happens with the mother, you get what happens with the father, you get what happens with the narrator, and all the while that we're getting these things, we're checking in with the main character and his friend, my friend, this monster that it's like a literal monster, and there's moments where you're like, is this all in his head? And the answer is, you'll see. And it's just really, 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 really good and refreshing. It's nothing like Possessor at all. It couldn't be less like Possessor, but I'm pairing them together because it does feel, it's that idea of refreshing. This felt, reading this as, it is not uplifting. Neither is Possessor. Neither of these is a laugh-a-minute, feel-good book/movie of the winter. But it felt refreshing in a way, like, oh, this feels like a serious work. I feel like I'm reading something serious. I feel like I'm reading something that's not something I've read before. It reminded me of like when I was like a pretentious college student and read literary fiction just as much as my genre fiction to try to like keep up with the quad discussions of like Michael Chabon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and the folks that won like the Pulitzers and stuff like that. Like I love that kind of reading, and I haven't been doing a lot of it. I've really just been nose down, genre, just to keep up with my peers and what's going on in the genre. But it felt so nice to take at least a half step out of genre and open the door and be like, oh, the air is fresh out here. The ideas are vital, and it was nice to read something in a weird way that was super depressing. It was nice to read something where the characters were having a hell of a worse time than we all are, or some of us are, because it's a dark book, but not without. There's moments of lightness. There's like actual jokes in it. Like some of the characters are funny and they actually love each other and care for each other. So that's good too. So that adds some lightness to it, but it is a pretty dark book. Death and mental illness and all these, and repression and family secrets and town secrets and regret, and it's rough, but if that sounds like the kind of meal you're hankering, you're craving, you really can't do better than The Cosmology of Monsters. I really enjoyed it. I was turned on to it, or I finally pulled the trigger on reading it because I was on a panel with Hamill and Alexis Henderson, and Henderson wrote The Year of the Witching, which I'm actually listening to the audiobook right now, so I wouldn't be surprised if that's the book recommendation for next week. But I was talking to these authors, and I was like, wow, they're so smart. They think about the genre in a so much different way than I do, and I felt really kind of weird being on that panel where it was like two grown-up authors in more than the way that they don't write than my books YA and theirs aren't. More than that, felt more grown-up than me, and listening to them talk and listening to the way they thought about the genre and listening to the way they approached their work, I immediately was like, I've got to read these books. And I'm so glad I did, because they're both, I'm not done with The Year of the Witching, but both excellent so far. Cosmology of Monsters was fabulous. Will probably end up being one of the best things I read this year. All right, that's that. Once again, if you like slashers, Clown in the Cornfield. Even if you don't like slashers, if you have a young person in your life that likes slashers, if you have someone you want to get into horror reading that's either not a fan or hasn't yet graduated to young adult books, this would be the perfect gift for the holidays are coming up. Maybe and look how beautiful the hardcover is. Wrap this sucker up, put it under the tree, put it in someone's stocking, give it to someone for Hanukkah. They will enjoy Clown in the Cornfield. You'll enjoy it too. Get 2 copies. Get one for you, one for them. Everyone who's written a review of this book, everyone who's talked about this book, everyone who's tweeted about this book, Instagrammed this book, put it on Facebook, everyone who has tried to get their friends into it and succeeded and not succeeded, either way, thank you so much. The Amazon reviews help me out so much. Going to your local Barnes & Noble and facing it out at the bookstore helps me so much. Pestering the booksellers to order more copies in helps me so much. I'm really humbled, and thank you so much. And if you've read this one and you're like, when's your next book coming out? Have you read the 10 other books I have? If not, go get those. Next one's coming soon. I'm working on it, believe me. But if you haven't read Video Night, if you haven't read Tribesman, if you haven't read First When You Expect or Summer Job or Exponential, you will enjoy them almost as much as you enjoyed Clown in the Cornfield. So go check them out. Paperback, ebook, and audiobook right now. I'm Adam Caesar. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't, and I'll see you next week.